Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is your brother Daniel Haqiqatjou with another installment of Muslim Skeptic Live. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about a few important topics. I think that you'll find them very relevant and very interesting, inshallah. And you know, it's Thursday, almost the end of the week. It's been a crazy week. A lot has been going on. A lot of conversations have been happening. And a lot of things that we can learn from that, inshallah. So bear with me as we get through a lot of material, inshallah. I will be answering any questions, addressing comments. So feel free to put a comment, whether you're watching on Facebook or you're watching on YouTube. And I'll do my best to address everything. Sometimes there's a lot of comments that are off topic, but I try to filter those out and figure out what's relevant to the discussion to address. And, if there is someone who wants to call in and discuss something or challenge me on something, you can also mention that. And towards the end of the show, if there's anyone, we could even take some calls. We'll see if there's time for that, inshallah. So this week I published an essay really, on Hamza, Yusuf, and Omar Suleiman. And this article was in depth, showing that there is a kind of double standard within the Muslim community about what things are considered acceptable for imams, scholars, just public figures in the Muslim community to do, people to associate with. There's just a double standard with what's acceptable and what's not. And so if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can read this article, and I linked it in Facebook. It's the pinned comment. If you're on YouTube, maybe someone can post that article so people can see what we're talking about. But I want to just review some of the conclusions of that article. I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but I want to emphasize and underline certain points that I think are important. So, but before we get to that, before we get to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Imam Omar Suleiman, let's start with some other issues real quick that I think are relevant. But let's start with Qur'an, as usual, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا عدوي وعدوكم أولياء تلقون إليهم بالمودة وقد كفروا بما جاءكم من الحق يخرجون الرسول وإياكم أن تؤمنوا بالله ربكم إن كنتم خرجتم جهادا في سبيلي وابتغاء مرضاتي تسرون إليهم بالمودة وأنا أعلم بما أخفيتم وما أعلنتم ومن يفعله منكم فقد ضل سواء السبيل إن يثقفوكم يكونوا لكم أعداء ويبسطوا إليكم أيديهم وألسنتهم بالسوء وودوا لو تكفرون صدق الله العظيم. So these are two of the first ayat of the 60th surah of the Qur'an. So let me read the translation. O you who believe, you shall not ever take my enemy and your enemy as allies. You offer genuine love to them, yet they have disbelieved in the revelation of the truth that has come to you in the Qur'an. expelling the messenger and yourselves from your homes only because you believe in the one God alone, your Lord. If truly you have come forth striving in my path, meaning fi sabilillah, and seeking my good pleasure, then do not ever take them as allies, divulging the believer's secrets to them out of genuine love. And I, meaning Allah, is most knowing of all that you conceal and all that you reveal. For whoever amongst you does this has truly strayed from the path. If they should gain ascendancy over you, they would become treacherous enemies to you and stretch out their hands and their tongues in harm against you, for they wish that you would disbelieve in your faith. So subhanAllah, this is truly profound ayat. And these ayat, when I read them, I thought this is describing exactly what we see today with some figures within the Muslim community that have a tendency to collaborate with and work closely with non-Muslims, with kuffar. And I'm not saying that everyone who has any relation or affiliation with non-Muslims falls into this category and is addressed by these ayat, but for certain, some of them are. Some of the figures who collaborate closely with non-Muslims are doing so out of a love for those non-Muslims and are divulging the secrets of the believers to them. And those kuffar, those non-believers, are actually enemies of the believers and are fighting against the believers and are fighting against Islam. And so this is a reality. This is something that occurred in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you had munafiqeen who were doing this. And it has happened throughout the history of Islam. And today is no exception. Today is no exception to this pattern. And in fact, the non-Muslims have written about how to manipulate the Muslim community for the benefit of Western nations, Western governments, and so forth. And so they're very explicit on how to collaborate with certain hand-picked figures within the community in order to manipulate the Muslim community. And so we're going to talk about this, and I'm going to show you some examples of where the non-Muslims are describing their plot very clearly. So how can we be blind to this and ignore this and pretend like nothing is happening behind the scenes? So inshallah, we're going to talk about this. But first, I want to look at something that really caught my attention on social media, and I think that it's very indicative of some of the sentiments that we see, especially amongst younger Muslims. So let me show you a screenshot of this. Okay, so this is a Muslim woman, and she's posting on Facebook, and she says, "Last night I experienced my first hate crime. My friend Amal was driving and stopped at a red light, and I had my window wide open. A white family, husband, wife, and kids, pulled up next to me perfectly so an older white woman in the back seat can dump loads of water and juice onto me angrily while simultaneously yelling racial slurs at me. She then started to spit at me. I've never seen someone this angry at me and so filled with hate. She then got out of her car, trying to put her hand through my window to pull my hijab off. I quickly closed the window and she removed her hand, but then tried to open my car door to fight me. I begged my friend to quickly drive off. I remember the way my heart was beating when we left and how scared and wet I felt. That's the work of white supremacy at its finest. This is your average white American family. This is your post-Trump America." So periodically we get these stories that go viral on social media of a Muslim woman usually who experiences something like this. And it's very sad that sisters will get attacked sometimes and will have this kind of target on them because of hijab. So I'm not trying to dismiss the feelings of this Muslim woman or say that she is, making it up or faking it. That's not what I'm saying. But I thought it was noteworthy for a few reasons. Number one, I think it's a problem that she says that this is your average white American family. First of all, I don't think race has anything to do with it. To say that it's a white family, I think that we would recognize it as clear racism if you are attacked by someone who is black or someone who is Asian or someone who is Arab and say, oh, this is your average black person, this is your average Arab, this is your average Asian person. We would clearly recognize that as racist. So how is it any different when you say this is your average white American family? So I think that's quite appalling to make a racist statement like that. I don't think that you went through this scary event justifies making racial remarks. And then, so that's point number one, that you're saying that this is characteristic of white families. But then to say this is your average, like how big of a scale, if this is the average sentiment, if this is the average attitude of an American, then how could any Muslim live within the United States? So the lower estimates of the number of Muslims in America is about 3 million, right? 3 million. And how often are these kinds of attacks happening where it's, throwing a drink or making stupid anti-Muslim statements? Is it really that big of a proportion to say that this is your average white family has this kind of hate and has this kind of animosity towards Muslims? Don't get me wrong. I know that there are a lot of people in America who they don't like Islam, they don't like Muslims. Some of them would be even considered enemies of Islam because they want to fight Muslims, they want to kill Muslims. But I think that is a relatively small percentage. And really, I think that when we hear these things about, oh, this is post-Trump America, or this is your average white family because of Trump and so on and so forth, I think this is really not accurate. This is not an accurate portrayal of the sentiments of average Americans in the United States, especially in the Trump era. And I'll justify this. So let me share something else with you. So all of the favorability polls that are done to show what is the favorability of Muslims within the United States, all of them have shown that favorability of Muslims have gone up in the Trump era. All of them show this. And this is something that you won't really find many like civil rights, especially Muslim civil rights groups talk about, because it's kind of inconvenient and kind of goes against their narrative that, oh, there's a war because of Trump and all Muslims are now in danger and we're in the worst times because of his election. They're not sharing the actual stats that show that favorability of Muslims has gone up in the Trump era, like noticeably up, such that they are publishing these results. And so you have Pew, for example, saying that 7 in 10 U.S. adults say there is a lot of discrimination against Muslims. 7 out of 10. So that's a big jump. This is from 2017, the middle of 2017. In September of 2014, right dab at the tail end of Obama's presidency, that was only 59% said that there's discrimination against Muslims. So there's a 10 percentage point jump in the Trump era. In 2013, it was only 47%. And again, this is right in the middle of Obama's presidency. So fewer people in Obama's presidency thought that Muslims face discrimination. There's been a 20 percentage point jump now in the Trump era. So this is significant. It means that there is less animosity, there is more sympathy for Muslims in America now that Trump is president. Okay? And it's very easy to understand how this happens. And I wrote an entire article on it called Why Trump is Surprisingly Good for Muslims. And I explained that, look, there's going to be a rebound effect. You have Trump, who is just very ignorantly and stupidly bashing Muslims, saying that Muslims are a threat, these kinds of Islamophobic statements. And then because he's a disliked president and he's a disliked politician and his favorability as a president is so low, then people who don't like Trump are going to take the opposite view. And they're going to start promoting Muslims. They're going to go and reach out to Muslims. They're going to have a favorable view of Muslims and look at Muslims as being this oppressed group. And so I think that that prediction that I had before Trump won the election actually turned out to be very true. And I'm going to be writing about this as we approach the 2020 elections, just revisiting this whole conversation and addressing some of this wrong attitude about how anti-Muslim America and the US population really is. So another stat, also from Pew, most US adults now see little or no support for extremism among Muslims. So most US adults don't think that Muslims are terrorists or are supporting terrorism or are sympathetic to terrorism. So back in 2011, right, which is square right in the middle of Obama's presidency, 40% said that there's a great deal or a fair amount of Muslims who support extremism. Now that's dropped. Okay, that's dropped to 35%. The percent that say that that Muslims support some was 45% in 2011. Now it's 54%. So it's gone up. Okay, it's gone up. More people are saying that Muslims don't support terrorism or extremism at all, or not much. So this shows a big shift in the attitude towards Muslims. So it's important to be accurate about public sentiment, okay? Because if you're not accurate about public sentiment, then you make wrong decisions and you make the wrong compromises. And this is something that I've repeated over and over and over again. If you watch Muslim Skeptic Live, you know how much I emphasize this point. That if you are thinking that the entire world is ready to throw you into concentration camps and Muslims are on the brink of genocide, that fear is going to justify compromising on deen, compromising on religion, and saying, look, we're at a genocidal moment here, so it's fine if we support things that are contrary to our religion because we have to make alliances with everyone, regardless of what those people that we're allying with are calling for. So this has a very negative impact on the faith of Muslims and the overall religious character of the community. So that's why whenever I see one of these kinds of posts that I showed you the screenshot of, I just go back and I want to remind myself and everyone else that this is cherry picking, it's confirmation bias. Yes, you experience something traumatic, but is that something that is average? Is that something that is expected? Is that something that's common? No, in fact, it's very rare. It's very rare. Less than 1% of 1% of the 3 million estimated Muslims in the United States ever experience anything like hate or this kind of assault or attack or anything like that. And the statistics all show that. And so in the future, inshallah, the near future, I'll be writing about this in depth and providing a lot of statistics. And I just showed you a sample from Pew, but there's many more that shows how favorability for Muslims has increased. And actually hate crimes have not increased significantly in the Trump era compared to Obama era. And what is really the magnitude of that hate, and what is the ratio, what's the proportion? So these are all things that we have to keep in mind. All right, so let me pause and address some questions. And I also want to say that some people will say, oh, well, it's easy for you to talk like this, Daniel, because you can pass, like you look white, you look like your name is Daniel. What kind of discrimination are you facing in public? And the thing is that, I go out in public with my wife, and she's clearly Muslim. She's dressed in hijab and everything. And she goes out with the kids, and I go out with her and the kids. And so I can see, I've been married for over 10 years. I can see how people react, how people respond. And she has her experiences. And it's not really this kind of terrible dystopia that people make it out to be for the Muslim community in the West. Okay? Again, I'm not trying to deny that there are examples of assault or insulting, racial slurs, things like that. Yes, I know all of that exists, and I'm very sympathetic to people who go through that, and we should support people who go through that. But I just don't think that fear, a overreaction to that in terms of fearfulness is justified, and that can have a lot of negative impact. So, let's see. Abu Talha says, do you think she meant this was an average white American family, as in just an everyday white family? Like when someone says, I'm just an average guy, nothing special. So she doesn't mean average white family as in on average white Americans are doing things like this. Just something that I thought. No, I think that she was very clear in emphasizing that this is your average white American family. And this is what post-Trump America is like. So I think that it was pretty clear what she was getting at in her comment. So this is your average white American family. Either way, it's a racist thing to say. Like if you said this is your average black person, because I had a negative experience with someone who is black, therefore this is your average black person. It's a racist thing to say regardless. Okay, so now let's talk about the article that I shared with you and published on Muslim Skeptic this past week about Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Imam Omar Suleiman. And before getting into this situation, I want to talk about a personal experience that I've had. This is something that has deeply affected my family. It has deeply affected me, and it's the perfect example, I think, or it's a highly relevant example of what happens when religious figures get involved with political power and all of the negative consequences that come from that. So in my family, I've mentioned before that my parents are very secular. They distrust religion. They distrust religious authority. And that's how I was raised as well, to think that religious people, and specifically imams, are not really trustworthy because they have ulterior motives. They're just using religion for their own benefit. And what is the source of this kind of sentiment that they had? Well, in Iran, in 1979, you had a revolution, and there was a new government that came into power within Iran. My parents are from Iran. And this new government tried to justify itself on a religious basis, and it claimed to have scholarly backing. And so it co-opted many of the scholars within that country. Okay, I know they're Shia. Okay, Iran is a Shia country. I used to be Shia. I became Sunni. But I mean, that the Shia versus Sunni is not really pertinent to what I'm trying to underline here. So the point is that the government created this opportunity for scholars to come and join the government and fill these different positions within the government. And so you had some scholars who said, great, this is a perfect opportunity. We can influence the government for the better. We can change society for the better. And then you had another faction of imams in Iran who said that, no, this is not a good idea. We should not be involved with the government. The government has all indications of being corrupt. The government is already implementing certain things that are compromising on our religion. And so we have to remain independent, and we shouldn't take advantage of this opportunity. So those scholars, that second group, were kind of seen as naive. They were seen as not really taking advantage of a golden opportunity. And the first group of scholars obviously got into those positions and benefited in terms of gaining power, gaining a lot of money, gaining access, and so forth. So what happened after 1979? Exactly what the second group of scholars predicted. There was a lot more corruption in the country. You had a government who started violating religious principles. You had an increase in poverty. You had an increase in the amount of sheer corruption, where politicians were stealing from the public, essentially. And so what happened in that situation? You had people who supported the scholars who joined the government. Those scholars were, for the most part, silent. They couldn't really say anything. They couldn't really claim or protest, because they're eating and drinking, and their entire livelihood is based on that government. And so they're not going to speak out. If they did, they would risk death, but they put themselves in that situation. So they have to be silent, or in some terrible cases, they even endorsed what that corrupt government was doing. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back online. I'm having some trouble with internet connection. Okay, sorry about that. Inshallah, that won't drop again. All right, so I was describing these two groups. So you had one group who their religion became corrupted because they're following scholars who are endorsing corruption and are affiliated with corruption. And then you have a second group who can see the hypocrisy, can see that, wow, these scholars have sold out. They're associating with these government officials, these agencies, because they are pursuing their own pockets, their own benefit, and that's why they're not speaking out against the corruption of the government. So this is hypocrisy. And so they became disillusioned from scholars, they became disillusioned from Islam as a whole. And so a very large percentage of the Iranian population fell into this kind of disillusion. And my parents are some of them, are included in that group. And even to this day, I can't really talk to them about imams or scholars, because they think that, oh, why are you wasting your time? All of these people are in it for themselves and they're corrupt, blah, blah, blah. All of these kinds of cliches. But I can't really dismiss what they're saying because it's based on their own life experience and what they've seen in their own countries. So this is my personal experience with imams and scholars associating with those who have power and affiliating with groups who have all kinds of wrong ideas, corrupt principles, promoting injustice and so forth. And so this is what I see, unfortunately, when it comes to someone like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf associating with government power, political power, affiliating with these different groups in the Gulf, even within the United States. And I'm not going to rehash everything that I described from Sheikh Hamza in a previous episode, Muslim Skeptic Live number 16, where I detail exactly what is wrong with Hamza Yusuf associating and affiliating with different government agencies. But on the thing that I noted, and this is what disturbs me, is that there was a double standard. You have people who will criticize Hamza Yusuf and will point out that what he's doing is wrong, and they'll even denounce and condemn it. But then you have others who are engaged in the same practice, maybe even worse, and there is nothing being said, and there is silence, and this pretty much going under the radar. And so that's why I want to write this piece about Imam Omar Suleiman. Okay? And so I did reach out to him. He didn't respond when I reached out. I basically asked him how he can justify participating in a particular event. And the thing about Imam Omar Suleiman is he is involved with a lot of different activist groups. And this is based on public information because he posts about it, or other people will post on social media about his involvement with this or that group. And many of these individuals and groups are problematic. Okay? But this past week, there was one event that was just, beyond the pale. And I couldn't justify not saying anything about it. And this was called the Muslim Caucus Inaugural Conference. This is something that was taking place Tuesday and Wednesday this past week within Washington, D.C. And what was it? Basically, Muslim Caucus is a group that is encouraging Muslims to get involved with democratic politics. That's really the whole point of the organization. And they have this conference that they want to do annually. And so Imam Omar Suleiman was the keynote speaker in this conference. There was a lot of different Muslim groups that were co-sponsoring the conference, such as CARE, MPAC, Muslim Advocates, and other groups that are very problematic groups, right? We're talking about groups that are calling for the active reform of Islam. And you have other speakers who are calling for the active reform of Islam, who are calling for women to lead prayer, are calling for the acceptance of LGBT in Islam. You have one speaker who calls herself a female imam, who officiates lesbian and gay nikah, quote unquote. These are the types of figures that you have. In addition to that, you have politicians like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and I've discussed at length how bad these individuals are and how much damage they're doing to the Muslim community because of their advocacy for LGBT, their advocacy against the Sharia. Ilhan Omar is introducing legislation against the Sharia within Congress and rallying other congressmen to vote for a bill and pass a bill that will denounce Muslim countries who implement the Sharia. She's calling the Sharia barbaric. She's calling it anti-human. So anyway, I'm not going to rehash all of this, all of the problematic figures that are coming together in this conference under the banner of Muslim democratic political involvement. Okay? You have people who are cozy with Zionists. You have people who are pushing CVE, countering violent extremism, against the Muslim community. You have Qadianis masquerading as Muslims. All of these kinds of people. So it's a cesspool. It's a cesspool. And so it's shocking. It's shocking to have a religious figure, someone who is seen as a respected imam, a respected leader, going and speaking at this event. And not only speaking, giving the keynote, like the closing keynote for the entire event. So I had to bring this up. And the thing is that it happened at such a moment where you have all of this justified criticism against Hamza Yusuf. Justified criticism. And then this is happening pretty much the week after, and there's silence and no one is talking about it. No one wants to point out that, hey, this is the same exact thing, if not worse. Same exact thing, if not worse. So I asked within that article a few questions. And so I think it's worth emphasizing these questions. And why it's important to ask these questions. Okay. So question 1, why did Omar Suleiman legitimize this gathering with not only his presence, but also a closing keynote speech to cap off the event? Okay. It is legitimizing. I've already explained this in previous Muslim Skeptic lives. I've explained this within the article itself. Okay? And if you're not convinced, because some people will say that, well, the fact that he attended and he spoke there doesn't mean he endorses everything that everyone there is saying or what everyone there is standing for. Okay? That's something that's irrelevant. Okay? It's not relevant what he himself thinks when he's silent on that. Right? All that we see is that he's attending it. He is attending and he's playing a major role by speaking there. So how is that not a legitimization? It's giving religious legitimization, not only to the people there, because the people who are attending that cesspool think that, okay, well, we have an imam who's coming, so this has religious legitimacy. Otherwise, why would he attend? Just like the people in Iran, in the story that I gave you, thought that, well, if this government is being endorsed by these scholars, that means what they're doing is legitimate, right? And the government officials think that, okay, these scholars are endorsing us, so what we're doing is legitimate. So this is a problem. And if you still think that it doesn't follow that just because he is speaking at the event that he is endorsing the event, then why don't you have that same excuse for Hamza Yusuf? Why don't you have that same explanation for Hamza Yusuf being involved with the Trump administration, being involved with the UAE government, being involved with different tyrannical regimes? Why don't you have those excuses for Hamza Yusuf? Or why don't you have those excuses for someone like Wajahat Ali and MLI, the Muslim Leadership Initiative, where you had Muslims who were basically given tours of Israel by this Zionist group called the Shalom Hartman Institute. You have this Zionist group who's facilitating a tour of Israel, facilitating all kinds of programming and bringing on Muslim leaders just to talk about Zionism and Islam and Jews and religion, and just have a synergy of people coming together and sharing ideas. So Wajahat Ali and others involved with MLI, involved with these Zionists, would say that just because I'm involved doesn't mean I support Zionism. Just because I'm participating doesn't mean I'm a Zionist or that I approve of what Israel is doing. So no one bought that argument, right? No reasonable person would hear that argument and think that, oh yeah, that makes sense. You're just taking money. You're just being wined and dined. You're being flown to speak, to participate. You're being, plastered on all our marketing. You're being given this position where you're giving the keynote. Oh, but yeah, we recognize that you're not really supporting this. So that's one question. So then, second question, does Imam Omar think that this caucus and these conference participants are good representatives of Islam in America? Is their vision for the community a vision that he is endorsing? If not, is he willing to clarify? Is he willing to make crystal clear who and what he does and does not support? Or is he going to let the community come to its own conclusions? This is important because if you don't come out and say that this is wrong, what this person is saying is wrong, what this person is standing for is wrong, in clear, unambiguous terms, then naturally people will have certain conclusions. We have to judge by what is apparent. We have to judge by what your actions say. And if you have a long history, actually, of associating with these people and participating in these events, then you can't blame people for coming to the conclusion that this is what you support. You've never said anything against it. You've never come out and say, no, I disassociate and I denounce, actually, the project of the Muslim caucus. I denounce the project of these pushers of CVE, these pushers of LGBT. I disassociate myself from Ilhan Omar when she says the Sharia is barbaric. I disassociate. I don't play nice with people who are attacking Islam. I don't sit and have arm in arm, right, with them. If you want to oppose them, if you want to, instead of standing arm in arm with them, actually confront them face to face and say this is wrong, okay, that's something else. What if Imam Omar, he goes to such an event and he starts denouncing. And he starts calling them out and saying, this is something that is extremely, extremely despicable, what Ilhan Omar is doing, what Rashida Tlaib is doing, what Khizr Khan is doing. It's despicable what this Muslim caucus is promoting. If he did that, okay, mashallah. Mashallah, then he should be supported in that. Okay? He's attending this event to spread the haqq. He's attending this event to establish the haqq. But that's not what he did, right? It's not what he did. He went there and he praised them and congratulated them and said this is a blessed gathering and everyone is speaking their truth. That's what he said. And actually you can find the recording of it online if you want to find it and watch it. He praises the gathering. So then what conclusions should we have from that? Okay, and then the next question, does Imam Omar not recognize that he's sending a clear message to his hundreds of thousands of followers around the world that these anti-Islamic individuals and their anti-Islamic causes are worthy of support and imitation? That's a pretty clear question. Does he not realize that when he goes on record supporting the likes of Ilhan, the Sharia is barbaric, Omar, and Rashida, my Allah is she Tlaib, and stands next to them on stage, that he's crowning them as religious role models for the community? I'm not going to elaborate that. I've already explained it dozens of times. Does he not realize that he's also encouraging these speakers at the Muslim caucus and giving them the impression that what they're doing is Islamically acceptable? Or at least you can tolerate it within Islam, because if it wasn't acceptable, if we can't tolerate it, then how is this imam, this religious figure, this scholar coming in, blessing the event, telling us to speak our truths, and presiding over a keynote speech? And then the last question, does he realize that he's setting a precedent for other young Muslims and imams? Because I can just see all these young imams, students of knowledge, thinking, oh, this is acceptable. This is acceptable to sit with people who denounce the Sharia. It's acceptable to be involved in these kinds of events. So he's creating a disgusting precedent that people, unfortunately, are going to learn from. And so we ask Allah to protect us from that, because this would be a disaster if we have more people following in his footsteps with this type of engagement. It's a disaster. So I asked these questions, and he needs to make clear where he stands. He's not answering to me, okay? That's not my point. No one needs to answer to me. The point is, these are questions that the community has. And whoever doesn't have these questions should have these questions. The community is and should be asking these questions of our public Muslim figures. Okay? We need to be asking these questions. And so he should answer that. Is he not accountable to the community? Is he not accountable to those who support him? Many of whom will actually monetarily donate and fund him and fund his organizations. Does he not have any accountability to them? Or should his supporters just shut up? Just shut your mouth. I'm the imam. I'm going to do whatever I want. I can associate with whoever I want. If you don't like it, that just means you're ignorant. You don't get it. Hopefully that's not his attitude. Hopefully that's not the attitude of him, of Hamza Yusuf, or any of these other figures. And sometimes you do see that kind of condescending attitude come out. I know it comes out with Hamza Yusuf, and I've seen it come out with someone like Wajahat Ali, participating in the Zionism-funded, BDS-violating MLI. They're condescending. Like, you guys just don't get it. You don't know that if we want to succeed as Muslims in this country, we have to make these kinds of compromises. We have to do this. You guys are just too stupid. And you're just a waste of time. If you can't understand it, just shut up and let us do what we're doing without being disturbed. Unfortunately, that's the attitude that we see. If you don't answer questions like this, if you can't justify it, then this is the kind of conclusion that people will think. This is your attitude. Another example was Dalia Mugahed. Okay, Dalia Mugahed is also very closely associated with Omar Suleiman at the different institutions that he's at, such as Yaqeen Institute, such as the Islamic Seminary of America. And so I wrote that article. I'm not going to rehash it, but basically the same issue where she's associating with cesspools and praising them and propping them up and so forth. And then I published an article asking very simple questions. How can you justify this? Don't you realize the damage that this is causing? And then her response was very telling. Her response was, I don't need to address this. Okay? You're just a attention seeker, ignorant. I don't have to talk to you about any of this. I don't have to answer these questions. That was shocking. It was shocking that she actually kind of slipped. She slipped by actually revealing her attitude and putting it in print for everyone to see. And, others have done similar things. So this is a problem. You need to answer the questions. And I'll give you another, and this is the next part of this episode that I want to focus on. There's context here that makes it very critical and essential for the Muslim community to ask these kinds of hard-hitting questions and demand answers. There's context that makes it very, very vital. I'll tell you why. Have you heard of the Rand report? The Rand report. If you haven't heard of the Rand report, if you haven't heard of Rand, it's a think tank. It's a think tank, and they have a history of publishing material on how to secularize, strategies on how to secularize and liberalize the Muslim community. Strategies on how to inject secularism, liberalism, feminism into the Muslim community so that Muslims are going to be more willing to be controlled and be influenced by Western governments. So Rand has published this. Anyone can read it. And so I'm not going to go in depth on everything about Rand. And inshallah, I was planning in the future to have an episode completely dedicated to these reports and just breaking them down and analyzing them. But for the purpose here, I want to just share some snippets of this, okay? Because it's very relevant. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm just going to go through some of these points. Okay, so this is from one of the RAND reports on building. Hold on, let me get the exact name of this so that you can look it up. Okay. The name of this report from RAND, R-A-N-D, RAND, Civil Democratic Islam, Partners, Resources, and Strategies. Okay? This is what this is from. So the author says this approach seeks to strengthen and foster the development of civil democratic Islam and of modernization and development. It provides the necessary flexibility to deal with different settings appropriately, and it reduces the danger of unintended negative effects. The following outline describes what such a strategy might look like. So number 1, support the modernists first, enhancing their vision of Islam over that of the traditionalists by providing them with a broad platform to articulate and disseminate their views. They, not the traditionalists, should be cultivated and publicly presented as the face of contemporary Islam. Okay, so it's talking about platforms, conferences, media access, so on and so forth. Support the secularists on a case-by-case basis. That's interesting. And the rest of the report explains that the outright secularists are not going to be accepted by the Muslim community. The ones who are calling for, the acceptance of LGBT, for female imams, for open collaboration with Zionism, those Muslims are not going to be accepted by the majority of the community. So, what the author is saying here, okay, case-by-case basis. No, we have to support the modernists. We have to support the modernists because they have more acceptability. And so, therefore, we can influence the Muslim community through them better than through the outright secularists, the ones who are clearly, openly secular. Okay? Point number 3, encourage secular civic and cultural institutions and programs. This is very interesting. Encourage secular civic and cultural institutions and programs. What is the social justice movement all about? What is the democratic platform for social justice all about? It's about secular civic rights. Right? That's all it's about. So you encourage that, and then that will have an effect, because then the religious elements of, for example, da'wah, calling to Islam as the exclusive truth, that's on the side. And ideally, that's completely ignored. What's important, no, we foreground social justice, a secular understanding of social justice. Yeah, sure, you can pepper some ahadith, you can pepper some ayat in there, but the overall thrust is it's a secular, civic, civil rights movement, an issue. Okay? And that's what the Muslim caucus is. They have no religious programming, no connection to religion. The only connection was to bring an imam to give the keynote. And what did the imam say? Just supporting these kinds of projects, supporting this kind of civil movement. So that is very telling. Next slide. Some additional, more direct activities will be necessary to support this overall approach, such as the following. So this is, again, the RAND report. More ideas for supporting this strategy. help break the fundamentalist and traditionalist monopoly on defining, explaining, and interpreting Islam. Break the monopoly. So one good way to break the monopoly is to have a conference and include all of these reformists, include all of these liberals, include all of these female imams. Okay? Because you're breaking the monopoly. Now they have a seat at the table. Now they get to have a conversation about Islam and how the Muslim community should progress. Include the Qadianis. Include all of these, people soft on Zionism. That way you break the monopoly. And then you legitimize it when you have a religious figure there, an imam there. Number 2, identify appropriate modernist scholars to manage a website that answers questions related to daily conduct and offers modernist Islamic legal opinions. A modernist website. I don't need to, be too explicit about that. Number 3, encourage modernist scholars to write textbooks and develop curricula. Okay? So again, these are modernist scholars, so they're not outright secularists. They're not outright secular. These are people who have all of the external appearance of being a traditional scholar or imam, but all they promote is modernism. All they promote is feminism. All they promote is social justice. All they promote is civic engagement. Okay? That's an important part of the strategy that Rand is setting out. Okay, and then number 4, publish introductory books at subsidized rates to make them as available as the tractates of fundamentalist authors. So basically, again, mass media distribution. And then the 5th point, use popular regional media such as radio to introduce the thoughts and practices of modernist Muslims to broaden the international view of what Islam means and can mean. So this is very dangerous for American Muslims, because when we do something and we promote something as a community here, it gets outsourced or it gets broadcast through the entire Muslim world. So Muslims in Syria and Palestine, in India and Pakistan, in Morocco, everywhere are looking at America and saying, oh, the Muslims are doing this there, so maybe we should try it. Maybe it's acceptable. Maybe that's why they're so successful living in America, because they accommodate and they compromise and they do this and that. So this is very, very telling. And this is why this context is so important for holding scholars accountable. Because how do we know that they don't fall into this? Okay? This is not a matter of husn al-dhan, by the way. And husn al-dhan, having a goodly suspicion, is completely misinterpreted within the Muslim community. Husn al-dhan doesn't mean you see something wrong and you see someone do a wrong action, especially a wrong action that harms others, and then staying silent and not saying anything and thinking, oh, he must have a good reason for that, otherwise why would he be doing it? There's no such thing in Islam, like that kind of husn al-dhan. Husn al-dhan means that, okay, you see someone doing that, you ask them, why are you doing it? Explain yourself. Tell me what is going on here. Husn al-dhan means, okay, I don't assume that that person is evil or has a black heart, and I don't tell him, oh, I think you have a black heart, right? That is not acceptable in Islam. No, you just judge by the apparent. Maybe the person is genuinely ignorant. Maybe the person is not ignorant. Maybe the person is malicious. You can't tell, but you can judge the action, you can judge the behavior, you can ask questions, you can hold the person accountable. You can say, if you continue doing this, we are not going to support you. If you continue doing this, we are not going to invite you, we are not going to fund you, we are not going to give you this position. That's necessary in Islam. That's what Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar means. Enjoining good and forbidding evil. That's what it means. If this conception of husn al-dhan that some people have completely obliterates enjoining good and forbidding evil. Okay, next slide from Rand, and it gets even more telling. So more points of strategy. Build up a modernist leadership. Create role models and leaders. Modernists who risk persecution should be built up as courageous civil rights leaders. There are precedents showing that this strategy can work. Okay, and then there are some examples. So interesting. Build up courageous civil rights leaders. This is a big part of the strategy. Point number 2, include modern mainstream Muslims in political outreach events to reflect demographic reality. Okay? Avoid artificially over-Islamicizing the Muslims. Instead, accustom them to the idea that Islam can be just one part of their identity. This is exactly what this Muslim caucus event was about. This is exactly word for word. And this report was published over 10 years ago. Almost 15 years ago, this was published, and it's describing exactly what Muslim Caucus is about. It's about civil rights leadership. It's about political outreach. It's about, oh, well, we're Muslim, but that's one part of our identity. The bigger part of our identity is fighting for justice and standing with our neighbors to march in the Women's March, to go to these rallies, to support the democratic politicians, and so on and so forth. This is the bigger picture. It's describing it as if, like, yeah, I mean, it's shocking when you read it. The third point, support civil society in the Islamic world. This is particularly important in situations of crisis, refugee situations, and post-conflict situations in which a democratic leadership can emerge and gain practical experience through local NGOs and other civic associations on the rural and neighborhood levels, as well as civic associations are an infrastructure that can lead to political education and a moderate modernist leadership. So try to understand what this is saying. It's saying that it's important when there's a crisis, when there is a political situation of chaos, right? And there's confusion anywhere in the world, then this is the opportune time to have these leaders stand up, because then they can portray themselves as civil rights leaders. Civil rights leaders. And so I would argue that for Muslims in America, the election of Trump and the hysteria that was artificially created within the community was this situation. Was exactly this situation. A crisis was artificially created. Oh no, we're going to be thrown into concentration camps. Oh no, Donald Trump is going to kill us all. Right? And then you have certain figures who present themselves as fighting for civil rights, as fighting for social justice and so forth. And it's very identitarian, a Muslim cultural identity that de-emphasizes things that are important in Islam, such as opposition to same-sex fahisha, opposition to the kind of feminist project, opposition to the disillusion of gender, opposition to perennialism, opposition to being co-opted by religious groups and taking other religious groups like Christians and Jews as awliya. All of these things are de-emphasized, explicitly so. And what is emphasized is social justice, fighting for civil liberties. We're all about fighting Islamophobia, fighting back against Trump. That is what is the only priority, and that justifies holding hands with all of these fusaq, basically, all of these evil people. So this is very telling. And then this final point, develop Western Islam, i.e. German Islam, American Islam, French Islam. This requires gaining a better understanding of the composition as well as the evolving practice and thought in these communities. Assist in eliciting, expressing, and codifying their views. Yeah, American Islam. How many of these figures, these popular figures, are constantly promoting American Islam and saying that our situation in the West is unique and therefore requires unique solutions, and therefore we need to reform, and therefore we need to have a different kind of usul al-fiqh, that breaks from the Islamic tradition, that breaks from the fundamentalist understanding of Islam. I mean, it's almost like a joke. It would be a joke if it weren't so depressing. So this is why we have to ask questions. We have to ask questions and we have to demand answers, because this is the context. This is what we're seeing being plotted by the enemies of Islam. So if there are people who are seemingly falling into that, we have to hold them accountable. We have to ask them questions and not be naive about it. And if they refuse to answer, what if they refuse to answer, or they don't answer properly by denouncing these groups and these ideologies? Okay, what does that mean? Well, it implies that, again, they don't care. They don't think that they're accountable. They don't think that they need to answer the objections of the community. Okay, this is a very toxic attitude, and so of course we shouldn't support figures or imams who have this kind of attitude where they don't address our questions, they don't address our concerns. Okay? And so this is taking advantage of the community, as if they want to eat their cake and have it too. They want to play the role of the popular scholar, imam, religious figure, social justice imam, and they want to present themselves as religious and devout and committed to Islam. But on the side, they're associating with all of these problematic people, problematic institutions. Okay? You can't have it both ways. You can't pretend to be a orthodox authority on Islam, a religious authority, and then also be in these compromising affiliations. You can't eat your cake and have it too. This is a conflict. And so we can't allow them to take advantage of this. Okay? And the main way that I've been doing it is by shedding a light on it. Shedding a light that, okay, there's a contradiction here. There's a double standard here. This is not right. And so you can't play both sides. So I think that this is a model. And I hope that the Muslim community takes this as a model of asking questions, right? I think that if you read my articles, I've done multiple articles like this, multiple essays. I've talked about it on Muslim Skeptic Live, calling out Hamza Yusuf, Omar Suleiman, Sohaib Webb, Linda Sarsour, Dalia Mugahed, and others, okay? And a few things, okay? If you want to do this right, I'm encouraging everyone in the community to do this, but you have to do it right. Because if you don't do it right, then people can easily dismiss you. Okay? The first thing that you'll notice is that I don't pretend like I know people's intentions. Okay? I don't say something like, oh, Sheikh Fulan, that scum, that traitor dog, that this and that, right? I don't do that because that's inappropriate to call names like that. And it also means that I know what isn't, or I think I know what's in the hearts of those people. That's not right. Okay, so I avoid that. What you need to do is ask questions based on publicly available information. That's another thing. I'm not spying on anyone. I'm not going and saying, oh, I had a conversation with a victim and this victim is anonymous, but this victim says that Imam so-and-so is really, really bad and he's actually an abusive predator, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole other conversation, and we'll have that conversation, inshallah. But that's not public information. That's just rumors. Okay, that's spreading rumors, and namima even can fall into ghaiba. That's not good. Just focus on public information. The thing about some of these imams and scholars, they're very open. Okay, either they're advertising their own associations on their social media, or the groups that they're involved with are advertising it. Okay, so with Imam Omar, he didn't actually advertise that he was part of this Muslim caucus and he was going to speak there. But other people at the Muslim caucus were advertising it Other people were promoting, oh, Imam Omar is going to be there. So when I write articles like this, people will sometimes say, oh, wow, Daniel, this is a lot of research. You've done a lot of legwork to put all this together. Yeah, it is a lot of work. It's time consuming, but it's not like some secret access that I have, or that I have like some back channels that I can use. No, this is just, all I have is a laptop and an internet connection. And then that's all the research takes, right? So my encouragement is that we need to ask questions. We need to hold public figures accountable in the context of something like the Rand report. This is very critical. Otherwise, our community is going to get played. Okay? It's going to get played. We're, as a community, as believers, we're going to be manipulated by kuffar, by disbelievers who are enemies of Islam and who want to wipe out Islam and who want to secularize the Muslim world, liberalize the Muslim world. That's the stakes. Okay. So let's now go to some questions. Abu Mujaddid says silence is consent, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. So if we're asking these questions and then the figure or imam is silent, okay, then what can we conclude? That means that maybe you have no problem with these cesspool people. Oh, here's I got a super chat. The rare super chat from Muhammad Abdurrahim. Jazakallah khairah for your contribution. It really helps. So he says, who are some trusted Western scholars? So there are a lot of different scholars who I follow and I think are trustworthy, and I share them on my page. So one of them, for example, is Sheikh Salek. So if you go to my page, he is actually one of the big students of Murabit al-Hajj in Mauritania who passed away. And so he is very knowledgeable and he is very authentic, mashallah. So he is someone that I recommend, Sheikh Salek. But there's others. There is Mufti Yasser Nadim, who is based out of Chicago, and he runs an institution called Darul Uloom Online, and he, it's remote learning basically. So if you're a student of knowledge, or you want to be a student of knowledge and you want to study seriously, but you can't really travel anywhere, then this is a great option, Darul Uloom Online. And so that has a number of scholars associated with it. It's Mufti Yasser Nadim, and he himself has studied overseas for many years and is extremely knowledgeable, mashallah. There's others, graduates of the University of Medina. So someone like Ustad Sajid Lipham, he's someone, mashallah, who I've had the opportunity to meet and talk to and follow some of his work. He has a YouTube channel, a lot of great content that he puts out. And I've actually interviewed him. He's interviewed me. So he's someone else that I recommend. There is someone who has an institute, actually. It's called the New Muslim Academy. The New Muslim Academy. This is a great resource. And for anyone who wants to learn the basics of Islam, maybe you're a convert or maybe you didn't really study Islam and so you want to study Islam, New Muslim Academy, and the director of that is Sheikh Ahmed Al-Kurdi. So his material is really good. I recommend following him as well. So these are people that I trust, and these are people who I think are doing a lot of good dawah and good teaching of Islam. And there are many others, as well. But if I want to list them all, it would take me all day. But none of them are going to attend an event like the Muslim caucus. None of them are going to be associated with that kind of event. And I have a good feeling that if you ask them about participating in such a thing and speaking about it, that they would have very, very strong words for those people and those people who affiliate with them and those people who legitimize them. Another person, like if you don't know Sheikh Salah Sawi, he's in Houston actually, so he's close to where I am, and he's arguably the most knowledgeable faqih in the United States, and he's also I think he's the president of AMJA, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. So Sheikh Salah is, mashallah, excellent. And if you understand Arabic, his talks are very, very good, mashallah, very enlightening. That's someone else that I can also recommend without reservation. Okay. Yahya also gave some super chat. Jazakallah khairah. Who else? Any questions? So one question is, how do we distinguish if popular scholars in the West are liberal Muslims? So how can we really distinguish this? You have to understand what liberalism is. And so a lot of Muslims are not aware of that. I'm trying to do my part by educating the community on what liberalism is, what secularism is, and how to identify the signs. And that's what we talk about all the time on Muslim Skeptic Live as well. But, I mean, there's not going to be a very clear indication. There are going to be a lot of signs. So if you have someone, like an imam or a figure that is constantly associating with politicians, that is constantly associating with activists who are calling to things that are clearly known to be contrary to Islam. Like the issue of our day is LGBT. That is the clearest red flag. So any scholar who is going to compromise on this, who is going to associate with people who are compromising on this, that is a huge red flag, right? That's the biggest sign that will indicate to you that this is someone who is influenced by liberalism. Another major sign is someone who is compromising on aspects of Islam when it comes to women and women's issues. Because other than LGBT, feminism is the other main power within political discourse in the West. And so if you have a scholar who is making clear concessions on women's issues, then that's a big red flag that they're being influenced by liberalism. And so what's an example of this? Like there are some scholars who have opined that it's okay to have Muslim men and women in the masjid praying side by side. Right? This is unheard of. That Muslim men and women can pray side by side. So there's a men's section and a women's section, and there's no partition or barrier, nothing between them, but they're side by side. This is unheard of. And so this past Eid, there was a Eid prayer by Sohaib Webb in New York, where it was the brothers and the sisters side by side. They're all decked out, in their finest Eid clothes, right next to each other. So that's a very clear indication. And anything that has to do with women in the masjid, like, women have to be in the same area as the men. They have to. Otherwise, this is unacceptable. ISNA put out a statement like this. ISNA put the, I forgot the official title of it, but it was the guidelines for mosques. And one of the requirements for the mosque is that the men and the women should be in the same prayer space. Okay? They didn't specify the orientation men in front or women in back, or side by side, but as long as they're in the same space. So it's unacceptable if women are on the balcony, or women are in a separate room, or women are behind a partition in the musalla. Even a partition or a two-way screen, even that is, or one-way screen, even that is unacceptable according to ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, that claims or positions itself as a kind of umbrella organization for the Muslim community. In reality, it's not, but they have those kinds of sentiments about themselves. So you have a statement like that, published by or signed on by Yasser Qadi, Omar, Suleiman, and others, that all masajid, if you don't have men and women in the same musalla without a partition, then it's invalid. It's not invalid religiously, but this is something that is not approved by ISNA, according to this statement, and it's signed by them. So that's a clear indication of someone who is influenced by liberalism. Where in Islam do we find that such a principle? Okay, let's see what else. What percentage of American Muslims would you say support the LGBT movement? It's really hard to tell because you have polling groups who are trying to manipulate the community. So I think that they exaggerate. So Pew has reported that over 50% of American Muslims support gay marriage and think that there's nothing wrong with gay marriage. This is what they claim. Is it actually representative? Is it really 50%? I highly doubt it. I don't think that 50% of the community supports same-sex marriage. But I don't know. I think the percentage amongst youth might be higher. Maybe, based on my anecdotal experience, it might be very high, which is a scary thing. But like I said, it's hard to get a definitive answer because these polling groups will try to manipulate the community. Because if you hear that, over half of the community, my community, thinks that this is acceptable, then I should think it's acceptable too. The majority is thinking it's fine, so I need to join the crowd. There's a kind of a bandwagon effect that is created with these polls. So that's why there's a conflict of interest when you have these kinds of statistics. But I don't know. I don't know how to judge that. Okay, let me see Facebook. Kareem says, what do you expect when our masjids and religious institutions aren't leading and don't address the important issues that we're facing? I argue unemployment, poverty, homelessness, domestic abuse are bigger problems than any side issues we focus on. We shouldn't be surprised to see many in our community being led astray. Who says that? What do you mean side issues? Okay. Unemployment, poverty, yes, those are issues. Homelessness, that's an issue because Muslims have to be fighting and supporting those who are downtrodden, those who are in a state of faqr, like poverty and misfortune. So yeah, that's always an issue. But there are other issues that are very important as well, and arguably more important, like preserving the iman of the community, making sure that the imam is Islamically literate, making sure that the community has the correct beliefs and the correct aqidah. Okay, making sure that the community has a love for Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, making sure that the community is willing to fight for the sake of Islam, making sure the community is willing to sacrifice for the sake of Islam. If you don't have that, framework and that foundation of Islam and Iman, then how are you going to fight homelessness? How are you going to fight poverty? Right? How are you going to ensure that the community is not going to fall into deviance and deviation and innovation? Those are also big dangers. So we have to have priorities. What comes first? Those who are emphasizing the secular civil issues and addressing it in conjunction with these kinds of movements like the Black Lives Matter or Women's March or all of these very far leftist organizations, there are big questions with involvement with that. Okay? And if Muslims are engaging with those groups without a foundation of Iman and Islam, they're in grave danger of falling out of Islam and being corrupted by those groups. So this is why we have to have our priorities. I've noticed amongst the Muslim youth recently, this is from Jahir. I've noticed among the Muslim youth recently, that they may not actively support LGBT or consider themselves to be pro-LGBT. However, they carry this principle of each to their own, and therefore against anyone challenging it, feels like a very slippery slope to be on as slowly further compromises are made. Yeah, to each their own is an incoherent philosophy. I mentioned this in the previous Muslim Skeptic Live number 17. To each their own makes no sense because there are many things that we don't tolerate. Okay? There are many crimes that it's not to each their own. No, there are laws against it because it's wrong, it's evil. And so who decides which issues are criminal and which issues are a matter of tolerance and to each their own? Who decides that? Well, Allah decides that. The Creator decides that. And the Creator has said that this issue of same-sex behavior is al-fahisha, is the most indecent kind of act that a person can commit. Okay, is the most degenerate kind of act that a person can commit. And that's why He has prohibited it and has set consequences for it and has said that this is going to lead to destruction. So it's not a matter of to each their own. The fact that some Muslim youth don't have this idea or don't have this conceptualization is because they haven't been educated. They haven't been educated or they've been misled by liberal figures. That's all there is to it. This idea of to each their own is nonsense, and it's definitely not Islamic. There are certain issues where it's to each their own. For example, how, let's say, what kind of car you drive. What's your favorite cuisine? Like, what kind of food do you like to eat? You like American food? Well, I like Desi food. You like Arab food? I like Chinese food. Okay, you like this kind of car? I like that kind of car. You like to live in this kind of house? I like to live in that kind of house. Hey, these are the things that are to each their own. Like, everyone has their opinion, and we tolerate the diversity. But when it comes to moral issues, and when it comes to these kinds of sexual crimes, then no, it's a crime. It's not to each their own, to each his own, to be grammatically correct. Do we say that with incest? Do we say that with bestiality? Do we say that with necrophilia? Do we say that with all of these kinds of sexual deviances? So Izzaddin says, some Western scholars have a lot of knowledge in certain aspects of Islam, such as Sirah. However, they may be influenced by liberalism on certain views. Shouldn't we still benefit from their knowledge? Well, there are other scholars who don't have that kind of negative influence. So life is short. Try to find someone who is not going to potentially mislead you, right? There's, alhamdulillah, a lot of options, and I mentioned a bunch of them. You don't need to waste time with people who are potentially going to confuse you. They're confusing other people because they're mixing liberalism with Islam. Because even in your question, you say, shouldn't we still benefit from their knowledge? Well, if you are learning from them, you don't know what is true ilm, what is true sacred knowledge, and what is liberal infusion. You can't tell the difference if you're just a layperson. So then keep yourself safe. Keep your Islam safe. Okay, back to YouTube. Muhammad Abdurrahim, another super chat. Jazakallah khairah. May Allah reward you for contributing. He asked how to deal with LGBT Uber riders. I don't know. Is this like a big issue of having LGBT people? How do you know that they're LGBT when they are riding the Uber or the Lyft ride sharing? I guess it's a problem. But yeah, may Allah make it easy for you. Yeah, there should be policies, right? So doesn't Uber have a policy where you're not supposed to like do anything sexual in the car? Like, do you mean like there are gay people getting in the Uber and you're the driver and then they're doing gay stuff in the back of the car? There should be an Uber policy on any kind of sexual activity in the car, right? Or do you mean like there's a drag queen that comes in the car? Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, this is just such a world we have to deal with. Waqar says, Daniel, do you think the scholars who are involved with UAE Axis will compromise on Palestine next? They've already compromised. They compromised on Philistine. They've compromised on China and the Uyghur Muslims. Okay, Uyghurs are being detained in camps, concentration camps. They're being killed. They're being separated, parents from children in China, just because they're Muslim. And what are these figures saying, right? What did Hamza Yusuf say about China? He had positive words for China. So I think they've already compromised on these issues a long time ago. Okay, Daniel, what's your opinion on fitna going on in Saudi with halal discos and Nicki Minaj doing concert? I talked about this 2 episodes ago, Muslim Live number 16. It's kind of sad what's happening in Saudi, and it means that it's going to spread across the Muslim world. But this is part of the liberalization project and trying to get Muslims under the boot of Western power. Because if Muslims are consuming Western culture and they're sacrificing their religious principles for consuming Western culture, then that means that they'll be controlled, that they'll be manipulated, that they'll be under the boot, right? It's like drugs. Right? The drug dealer might give you a free sample. Okay, the drug dealer gives you a free sample because he wants you to compromise your principles and smoke or inject that drug, and then you'll get addicted. And then when you're addicted, you're going to pay any price to the drug dealer. The drug dealer has control. And this is, in fact, how Western imperialism works. Look at China. Look at the Opium Wars, where so much of the Chinese, this is in the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, where they became addicted to opium. The British were pouring opium drugs into that country and creating a dependency so that the Chinese would have to pay the British and be under the control of the British. The same thing happened in certain Muslim countries. Okay, this is why opium is so important, and why so many Western governments have tried to control Afghanistan, because one of the many reasons is because of the amount of opium that's in that country. Poppy seeds, the poppy plant is where opium comes from. So in the same way that you can have a chemical drug that you inject, Western entertainment and pornography and music can also be a drug. It can also be addictive, right? Dunya can also be addictive. So you get the Muslims to get accustomed to violating their principles, going contrary to Islam, and then they get hooked to the drug, and then you have them in your pocket. So one person asked, what is the biggest political issue facing U.S. Muslims? What is the biggest political issue? I think that we have to really focus on transmitting Deen to the next generation. Okay, that really has to be the priority, as I emphasize over and over again. Why? Because how can you engage in politics if you don't even have your religion? If the next generation has all left Islam, or is not practicing Islam correctly, does not understand Islam correctly, doesn't have true Iman, then really what's the point? Okay, we're not Muslim by name. We're not just Muslim as a cultural minority. So if the next generation, or in our current generation, if people aren't following Islam and upholding Islamic principles, then what's the point, right? What's the point of having a political project or a political paradigm? So we have to have our priorities. Has liberalism widespread? Has liberalism spread in the Middle East? Yeah, absolutely. It has spread in the Middle East because of political power. You have these liberal political regimes that are dictators controlling much of the Muslim world. And in other parts of the Muslim world where it's not an actual dictator, you have leaders who are in the pockets of the West and are having to commit themselves to liberal democracy. So you saw what happened with the country of Brunei. Brunei makes some very modest suggestions of following the Sharia, and the reaction was swift, and the reaction was uncompromising from the rest of the world, that absolutely not, you are not going to be practicing the Sharia in any way, shape, or form. So this is the influence of liberalism. Okay, Jahir has another question. This is the last question I'll address because I've talked too much and my voice is cracking. So one issue I've observed amongst a significant number of Muslims is they've placed their favorite scholars on a pedestal and look to find excuses for everything. How do we address the mistakes and errors of these scholars without getting a defensive response? So there are different ways to engage people, right? There has to be a multifaceted approach. I don't think that we should exclusively, if there is an opportunity, let me put it this way, if there is an opportunity for you as an individual to engage a figure on a private basis, that's good. You can try to do that, and you can try to frame it in terms of advising them and nudging them in the right direction. Okay, that's one thing. But I think public asking of questions in the way that I discussed earlier in the episode, that's also necessary. You have to have both public and private. Okay, for most people, you don't know these figures on a personal basis, and you're not going to have their phone number. You're not going to be able to contact them. Okay, for people that I do have the contact numbers of, and I feel that it's necessary, I do try to publicly or privately advise them. And I have done that with a lot of people over the years. But I realize that when it's just purely private consultation and very amicable, friendly, look, we're brothers, I'm trying to help you, I'm just giving you advice, then it's very easy to be brushed off. It's very easy for them to say, oh yeah, Daniel, I agree, I'm going to try to do better, and I'm just trying my best, so make dua for me. That's the kind of response I would get. Or they'll say, well, Daniel, no, I don't really agree with what you're saying, and I think you just don't get it, so, too bad. You have a problem, so what? Who cares what you think? So I get a range of responses from people over the years. And if you notice that I've been writing publicly for about 8 years now, since 2011 when I started my first blog. And I haven't really been calling people out by name for most of that time. It's only within the past year